Good morning, everyone. Happy Monday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. This is what I call my Morning Musings, and we're in the midst of a study of the Olivet Discourse, Matthew 24 and 25, and we've arrived at Matthew chapter 24 and verse 14. I shared with you last Thursday how I am convinced that, this passage is one of the more abused passages in the entirety of the Olivet Discourse. Jesus said this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to the nations. Then comes the end. Now, question. What end is in view? The only end that is in view is the end that the disciples asked about in Matthew chapter 24 in verse 3 in response to Jesus' prediction of the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. Now, Jesus predicted the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. The disciples, in direct response to that, tell us, when shall these things be? What shall be the sign of your coming, the parousia, and the end of the age? The end of the age. Jesus then began to give them the signs of the end of the age. So, if the end in Matthew chapter 24 and verse 14 is the end that the disciples asked about, then since the end that the disciples asked about is the end of the age tied to that temple, then they were not asking about the end of the Christian age. They were not asking about the end of time. They were asking about the end of the old covenant age. Folks, that's absolutely critical. Commentator after commentator after commentator injects the end of the Christian age into the disciples' questions and into the references to the end in Matthew chapter 24 and verse 14. And thus, we find our dispensational friends saying, hey, the gospel has got to be preached into all the world before the end of the current age, the age in which you and I are living now. But you and I are not living in the old covenant age. We're not living in the age the disciples asked about. We could go on and on about that, but it's absolutely critical that you understand what end is in view in Matthew chapter 24 and verse 14. And obviously we'll have more to say about it. But last Thursday I shared with you that Jesus said, this gospel. He didn't simply say the gospel will be preached into all of the world, then comes the end. No, it is in the Greek, this gospel. In other words, the news of the impending destruction of Jerusalem and the temple would be preached to all the world in that generation before the end of Matthew 24 and verse 3 came. I asked the question, and I asked the question because I'm challenged with this all of the time. When people hear the explanation, they say, Preston, how in the world could you possibly say that Jesus was saying the story and the prediction of the fall of Jerusalem and the destruction of that magnificent temple? How could you possibly say that Jesus called it this gospel, that is, this good news? Well, last year I wrote a book entitled The Gospel, Good News of Destruction. Now, it's a Kindle-only book. Go to Amazon and just do a search for The Gospel of Destruction. Subtitle is, how could Jesus possibly call the impending fall of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple, how could he call that this gospel? And so as promised today, I want to share with you, for a couple of videos, how it would be possible. But please take advantage. Look, you're going to be astounded at the information in that Kindle book. And if you don't have Kindle, contact me about a PDF of the book, okay? It's very inexpensive. It's $8.95. So it will help you to understand the power of what Jesus is saying. So the question is, how could Jesus possibly, conceivably, call the impending fall of Jerusalem this good news? Now, certainly on one level, it was horrific news. The description of that event by Josephus, who was an eyewitness, it's beyond belief. But that's not the point. The point was that from the Old Testament prophetic perspective, followed by the New Testament prophetic perspective, the everlasting kingdom, the never-ending kingdom, the eternal kingdom of Christ would not be fully established until the old covenant kingdom was taken out of the way. The old had to disappear and be destroyed before the new was manifested in its full glory. You might be able to tell from my shelf back here. Now, what you can't see on my shelf back here on the other two levels are other models of cars, okay? By the way, for all you Chevy lovers, there's even a model Corvette on the shelf up there. Okay. Now, the reason I point that out is I love to restore cars. And in order to get to the restored situation, guess what you have to do? You have to tear it down. You have to take it back to basics. I'm currently doing a 1965 Mustang Fastback. Wow, what a project. Anyway, I'm having to tear it completely down in order to bring it up to a new glory. In the Old Testament, in passage after passage after passage, what we find, and we find this particularly in what's known as the Little Apocalypse, as well as the prophecies from Isaiah 56 through 66, the prophecies of the coming new creation, we find one prophecy after another of the destruction of old covenant Jerusalem and the temple. And as a direct consequence of that destruction, we find the salvation of Israel, the Messianic temple, the kingdom, salvation for all men being made available, the everlasting kingdom. Now, does it present the reality of a horrific time that was coming? Oh, mercy sakes, yes. But rising out of the ashes and resulting directly from the horrific destruction that is predicted is the prediction of resurrection life, eternal life for those who follow Messiah of any nation at all. This is the gospel of the destruction. So tomorrow, I'm going to begin sharing with you. Here I am. I got off on these other things, but it's illustrative. These preliminary points are illustrative of how important it is to see how and why Jesus could call the impending fall of Jerusalem and the temple in AD 70, how he could conceivably refer to it as this gospel. So tomorrow, I will begin sharing with you. I'm not even going to go start with Isaiah chapters 2 through 4, an extremely powerful text that proves my point. But we're going to start with what is known as the little apocalypse, an Old Testament prophecy that Jesus and the New Testament writers quote from. They cite, they allude, they echo it over and over and over again in their predictions of the eschatological consummation and the resurrection. But I'm going to show to you that those contexts don't just predict resurrection, they predict the death of Israel. They predict death, they predict resurrection. They predict destruction, they predict new creation. You don't want to miss this at all. Hey, listen, take advantage of the offer on this gospel of destruction, the gospel of destruction, on Kindle, or like I said, if you don't have Kindle, contact me for a PDF, all right? It's cheap, it's $8.95, and it will literally blow you away. And it will show you why and how Jesus could refer to the impending fall of Jerusalem as this good news of the kingdom. In the meantime, take advantage of the June 2-book special, Into All the World, Then Comes the End, and The Last Days Identified. Go to my website, donkpreston.com, bibleprophecy.com, and order the 2-book special. Going to save you almost $10. In the meantime, I'll see you on the flip side.